Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Linda Addison. And Linda is a horror writer, and she also writes science fiction and speculative fiction, let's put it that way. And she is a short story and writer and a poet. And for those readers unfamiliar with your work, Linda, how would you really describe what you write?
Well, I mean, I've gotten a lot of recognition in horror in particular, although I have published science fiction poetry and fantasy. And it's more psychological horror, I would say, is how I describe my poetry. So I have collections. I've won 5 Bram Stokers, and I also received the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association Grand Master Award the end of last year. So that's the shiny resume part of the story. But a lot of people just think of my poetry, and like I said, I think of it like kind of weird, kind of psychological. It invokes a certain amount of feeling disturbance. So that's how I like to look at it on the
Wow.
horror.
So, what can readers expect from your latest story?
Well, I would say the latest thing that's out right now, there's a couple of things on the poetry side. One, I have a poem in Weird Tales,
Ah,
which is really exciting because, as you know, Weird Tales has been around forever. And so having a poem in there is pretty cool. And it's, again, a kind of weird poem. It's called The Last War. I also, last year, the latest book, which won the Bram Stoker, is The Place of Broken Things, written with Alessandro Manzetti, which is, again, weird poetry. The very, very latest thing is not poetry that I'm excited about. And that is I have a story in the Black
yes.
Panther Tales of Wakanda, which is extraordinary to have that out. And I'm very excited about that. And that it's science fiction, and I play with multiple realities because I'm kind of obsessed with that these days. So those are the latest things that I can think of. Oh, and there's other stuff. I have a poem and a performance in a online sort of art representation thing. So it's under New York Live Arts, and I'll put a bunch of stuff out about it, but there's a lot of exhibits of art and poetry and visuals. So it's really cool to have something mixed like that.
So, you do performance as well.
Oh, I do. I do like to read my work as far as performance is concerned, but that's something I learned to do years ago. I wasn't very good when I first started.
So, what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books or these kinds of stories?
Well, I think it's the same thing that has always drawn humans to any kind of entertainment, and that is for some escape, some to be able to go somewhere else other than whatever they're dealing with in life. Right now, the entire planet is dealing with this COVID uh, health thing. So, but before that, even before that, I think it's just a matter of, wanting to be out of their life and in someplace else for a while. And the differences between, science fiction and fantasy and, say, for instance, horror, is that in science fiction and fantasy, the escape part, you still want some tension, some kind of, ooh, is this going to make it? Are they going to accomplish this mission? But in horror also, I think a lot of people find a release from that little scare that happens, that tension that builds, and they know they're safe. They know it's not real, so they can have that moment of being, tense and then release. So I think that's mostly what speculative writing is about.
Hmm. Great. Now, I'd like you to choose one of your latest stories or poems, and and let me know what the inspiration was for it.
Okay, I guess if we're going to do poetry, I would say Weird Tales. Or would you like me to talk about the story in Black Panther? It doesn't matter to me at all. Did you want to go with poetry?
Sure.
Oh, story. Okay, so in Weird Tales, and again, the question of what's speculative and isn't is a whole nother discussion. But for me, it just means something that's not necessarily all reality based. But in the poem in Weird Tales, I had originally read Alessandro Manzetti's poem, which was a similar concept of humans dealing with their own inherent violence in a way. And so I'm very, since I did the poetry collection with Alessandro, he and I inspire each other very easily. So since that book had come out and won a Stoker last year, the idea of being in Weird Tales with a poem with him was very exciting. So I read his poem, and when I write poetry inspired by someone else, normally what I do is read it, and I sort of forget about it in a conscious level, because I believe a lot of my writing comes from my subconscious or superconscious, depending on your point of view. And then I sat down and wrote my poem. And so what's so interesting is that even the visuals that were created for it, here's mine, the last war. And you see it's sort of an Indian god, as god of war in the background. And then when they did his, it has a very similar visual in the background. So, you know, that's how I wrote that poem, is because of, after not thinking about it and reading his, then my own story came of what, in a way, if you read the poem, it's sort of a reaction of the planet to human violence. So, and I don't always plan these things out. They usually come after I've processed it in a sort of subconscious way. So.
Wow. All right. And what were the steps that you took to bring it from initial inspiration to a finished product?
Well, you know, I read Alessandro's,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, he writes in a way that really sets a mood, and his words really create an image emotionally inside. And so I let that sort of seep in me and sit. And then when I sat down to write my own, I wasn't even necessarily looking at his poem anymore. As what came out for me was this concept, and it sort of unwound very, I often describe my writing as organic. I don't necessarily plan every single line. When I sit, I just become very quiet and centered, and then whatever comes, comes. So the initial version of it was, you know, again, the earth as a whole's reaction to humanity's violence. And that's why it's called The Last War, because the earth is like, I've had enough of this now. So there was that sense of that as I wrote it. And then what I do when I rewrite something like that, after I see the story in there, which I've kind of basically told you, then I shape the poem and clean it up. I do a lot of taking away words, because usually in my first draft, there's a lot. And for me, poetry, for me, my poetry works best when it's really lean and the images are very strong. So that was sort of the process for that.
Okay. And what kind of research went into writing it?
Well, one of the things I always like to have in my poetry is some kind of realistic, non-fictional edge to it. So once I saw that the poem was going to involve like actually dismembering humans. I have lots of books, and then online now, you don't even need books, but I did research in what would happen if this happened to a human body and this happened to another human body. So a lot of the details in there that talk about the actual physical body of a person are things that I did research on. And also the same thing in the nature that's part of the poem. I did some research on what the versions that I saw in the poem would become. So, and work those into the story that I'd already laid down. So a lot of times poetry, and the same thing with stories like the story in Black Panther, I have the story unwind, and then I go back and lay down actual details to sort of enhance the actual images that I'm giving. So I like to do that.
Mm-hmm. So what is your favorite research story that you've ever had?
Well, that's an impossible question, but I will say what the latest one is. It's always the latest one for me. And the Black Panther story was really a joy to write. And in fact, I've been asked, you know, oh, you must really be into sports and so forth, because it's the story of a young girl coming into Wakanda's main city, the Golden City, to be trained as a warrior woman, or the Dora Milaje. I wrote the story because I was curious, what would that be like? So all of the things that she does actually for training, I didn't know. I don't know how to use a short sword. I don't know how to use a long sword. There's a lot of martial arts. I do Tai Chi, but that's it, you know. So I really enjoyed, and I do this with other things, but that's the latest one that I just finished, where I went and I watched videos on using short sword. I read articles about it to get the language right, to understand what the basic things are without actually becoming an expert, because that takes years. So even in the story, when there's a point where they're running track, people would assume, oh, I know what running track is. You just get out and run in a circle. But I never make those assumptions when I'm building in those layers. So I actually read about professional running track and things like that. So it was a lot of that, and that doesn't take away from me, because I'm always very story character oriented, whether it's a poem or a story. So adding those details actually sort of excite me on an imaginative level.
Hmm. And is there a character that you loved or hated the most when you were writing it?
I was totally in love with this 14-year-old girl. I mean, her name is Dira, and she comes into the story with a burden already of having lost her grandmother. And now she's there in this big city. She lived in a village, and the struggles that she goes through in order to accomplish what she wants, and that is to become a Dora Milaje, and what she's up against in her own way. I mean, these are the kind of things with every character that I'm in love with. I've had characters who are not the good guy, and I love that about them too. The intensity of that tension between what you want and can you get it, and are you willing to pay the price? And so for me, that is the thing about her that I just, you know, I really, really fell in love with the journey that she had to go through. And some of it was very hard, very hard decisions, but
Hmm. Okay, and what was the biggest challenge in writing and putting out? I'm going to say the Wakanda, like the story there.
well, it's interesting that you asked that, because poetry is really my first voice. So that's the thing I do the most. But in the last couple of years, I've found that I am able to write fiction more organically. But at the time I wrote this story, there was two things. One, I had 7 days to write 7,000 words, which is a lot for me as a poet. And the other thing is that I was recovering from, well, I had 6 months of long hauling with COVID symptoms while I was doing this. It was right in the middle of that. And the biggest thing I had was this chronic fatigue, where if I did one thing, take a shower, cook a meal, I had to take a 2-hour nap. It just was such a journey. So what's interesting is that I talked to someone who said to me, after reading the story and knowing that I had to go through that physicality of myself, they felt that the journey she went through to accomplish what she did was very much the same as what I went through to write this story. And it hadn't occurred to me consciously. So in order to write this, what I had to do, once I knew that that's what the story I wanted, I knew I wanted to write the story of this girl and what she went through and all that. I had to basically write for 20, 30 minutes and then go lay down for 2 hours. And I didn't do anything else. I ate, but I didn't do any social media. I didn't do anything else because there was just no energy for it. But when I laid down, since I do believe a lot of my ideas comes from my subconscious, I always had a notepad with me. So the way I wrote that basically is I would lay down and kind of sleep for 2 hours. And when I woke up, I had a scene in my mind, and I would write it down, the notes, and then I go to the computer and write for 20 minutes. And then I go lay down again for 2 hours. So almost every scene in that story as it unwound came to me as I was waking up out of this deep chronic fatigueness, which is not a surprise to me, because as I said, I'm used to organically writing like that. It was just that that was the real journey for me, was the
Wow.
body, my body, which I don't have anymore, thankfully, but.
Thankfully. Wow, that's really interesting. So now, what else can we expect from you in the near future, and not having to go to sleep every hour?
I know, really. You never know how that's going to go. I feel blessed that I did get some clarity, like the end of December. There's a lot of people who are still suffering terribly with
Yeah.
long hauling COVID things, and whew, my heart is with.
Yeah.
So, well, I've mentioned to my friends and other people is I am wandering into the world of novels, but there's not a lot to say about that until I actually like get one out, because it's a whole different kind of landscape to play in. I had finished the first draft last year, and then June I got sick. I couldn't write for 6 months. I'm just getting back to it now. But I have poetry coming out in several anthologies. As I said, there's an exhibit online that's out by New York Live Arts. I have um, trying to, how could I forget the most exciting thing that just happened? I have a poem coming out in the next issue of Fantasy and Science Fiction
Whoa.
magazine, which
Excellent.
beside myself with joy for. So that'll be coming out very soon. I'm very, very, very up about that. So, and the other anthologies, I really can't say much until they actually come out, but there's like 4 or 5, although one is already announced, Under Twin Suns. I have a poem in that one, which was a really interesting one to write for. But the magazine of fantasy and science fiction is like, oh my God, I've been trying to get into that for 40 years. So I'm
That's
very excited to have
that's
broke through
wonderful.
that wall.
Excellent. That's great. Now, I have a number of questions for you about being a writer.
Mhm.
What is your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Well, I mean, the thing is, it goes back to, I feel the same now as I did when I was a child. I was a huge daydreamer. I was very shy and withdrawn, not so much now, but, and I read everything that I could get my hands on. So I just love to sit and daydream. I mean, my report cards to my parents were like, Linda would get better grades if she didn't daydream so much. So I love that part. You know, I've been journaling since 1969. I have hundreds of different books. My latest one has L's all over it. And so I'm always writing down things, ideas, everything I see. I always see some level to it that's not necessarily logically real. So, and that's where I've always been. I've been since that, like I was 5 years old, and I'm still like that. So I really enjoy that sort of playing in the what if parts of my world. Sometimes it's inspired by just things that I see, I read, and sometimes it's inspired by terrible things in this planet that people do in this country to other people. So it's that process that is really like breath to me. You know, it keeps my soul and spirit alive. Then after that, I am always going to say I love seeing my name in print. There is nothing like it. I mean, Black Panther, name on the back of the book, yes. You know, same thing here. Weird Tales, name on the cover, yes. Even if it wasn't on the cover, I mean, knowing that it's inside. So, I mean, that's just a big joy to me, and I don't even know how to explain it. I love the idea of knowing that somebody somewhere that I don't even know is reading something that I wrote. When I was in New York, and I was in Dark Matter 1, which is the first anthology, and it was edited by Cherie Renee Thomas, who is also now the editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Well, that collection came out in 20 more years ago. And I remember being in New York on the subway, and someone was holding the book. Now, my name isn't on the cover, but I was in the book. And I was sitting on the subway, and I was like so excited. Even though I didn't know if they were reading my story, it didn't matter. This is somebody I didn't know holding the book, and I'm in it. So there's something about that whole thing that is very exciting to me.
Mm-hmm. What do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
Well, for me, the editing. I think editing is very, very, you know, the shaping, the making it balanced. I do a lot of mentoring, and that's part of what I come to when someone comes to work with me is let's figure out the kinds of things you need to do in editing and make a checklist, because writing the first drafts are not hard for me. And that's the thing I always work with when I mentor with someone too. Write the wildest, craziest first drafts you want. It can be sloppy. When I do stories, I don't even necessarily give the character's name, because I just need to rush through to the end. I just need to see that whole thing out. But then going back and the editing is the part that takes more work for me, and less with poetry, because as I said, that's my first voice. I can usually easily identify where I need to shape things because I know how I write, and I read that out loud so I can always hear it my own voice. But fiction, I have a writers group I've been in since 1990. And I send my stuff to them because even though I know I have a problem with passive voice, I have a problem with white room syndrome, I know those things. Apparently, commas are my kryptonite. I can't put enough of them in there. So, I mean, it's the editing part I think is the most challenging. But, you know, again, knowing that I have a writers group that's going to give me feedback, and having paid attention over the years, so I've built in some of my own things. I'm not nervous with it anymore because I know I have those paths. But in the past, that used to make me a little bit nervous.
So you said you have a writers group. Are there any other groups or organizations that have helped you in the past, that have helped you with your career?
Oh, absolutely. Individuals. I mean, you know, I have the writers group I've been in since 1990. And before that, it started in a workshop in New York that was run by Shauna McCarthy, who was an editor at Asimov Science Fiction Magazine. And that's where I began to really learn skills about how to edit my work. And she was incredible as far as helping give us tools on how to do those things. I'd taken a workshop, our group took a workshop with Nancy Kress, Terry Bisson. I mean, through those things, it's not a matter, and again, when I work with people, I tell them, I'm not going to redline your work and tell you what to fix. You and I together are going to understand where those points are that need adjustment. So by working through in workshops with them, I build in tools. And then there's organizations that are incredible for not so much giving direct feedback, but just for the support, the energy. For poets, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association has so many things that poets can gain from. The Horror Writers Association, the same thing. They have a mentoring program, which I've worked through, and resources. And just, you know, writing is such a singular thing where you're doing by yourself. And especially in the last year and a half where we haven't had conventions so people can go and be with other weird writers so you don't feel so weird. But, you know, a lot of these things have transitioned to online too. So there's just a whole slew of people over my entire life, including my mother, who was the first storyteller that I knew, that made me feel like it was okay to be a daydreamer and make up these stories.
Mm-hmm. So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Oh, see, that's not an easy one. Oh, my mind goes back to the first thing that just blew my mind, and that is winning the first Bram Stoker from the Horror Writers Association. I did not see that coming. You know, that was years ago, and I was on the final ballot with my favorite poets, and that was enough. I was like, I'm happy, I won already, you know, because when I first started writing, I would see where people like Charlie Jacob and Marge Simon were published, and that's where I would send my stuff because I wanted to be in those publications. So um, to be on the final ballot was everything to me. And then to have my name called, and luckily my mother was there, because I said she was the original storyteller who made me think it was fine to make up stories, because she used to make up stories with us. I was the oldest of 9, and she would tell us stories every night that she made up. So that kind of just totally blew my mind, to get a standing ovation from these people who are just like giants in the industry to me. you know, at that time, Peter Straub, everything. I didn't even know how to process it, honestly. There's pictures, you could look at that pictures and see that girl did not know what was going on. Then the last thing that just, again, blew my mind was the end of last year. As I was still dealing with the fatigue and headaches and everything from the COVID symptoms, is getting the Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Poetry Association Grand Master. I mean, that wasn't even on my list. That was not on my list. I have a bucket list that wasn't there. So yeah, things like that are just so unexpected. You just don't expect that, you know, that kind of awesomeness. So there's a
It's,
lot of good stuff like that.
it's so wonderful when they happen.
Oh, oh, yeah.
That's great. So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
To trust myself, to trust my connection to my imagination, to my muse, all these things that people call it. I call it my subconscious. I don't believe anymore in blocks. I know I can write about anything. You could say, Linda, can you write me a poem about a pad of paper? And I'll be like, yes. I'm not saying everything I write is like award-winning poetry, but I have this just trust in this, in the process of knowing that that something is always going to come. And sometimes it doesn't come in the time I want. So, but it'll come. So like I said, with the Black Panther story, I didn't know I could do it. When I was approached to write that story, I knew it was a tremendous opportunity to have something with a Marvel stamp on it, but I was just like, I'm going to try. And I had great trust in this connection to this part of me I knew that would always give me the creativeness. So that's the thing I think that has given me the most comfort in being a writer and life.
Mm-hmm. So, what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
Well, the first thing I think is where you create from, you know, to allow yourself to write in that first draft as if no one's ever going to see it, and just let yourself go. Just let the wildness go, let the whatever you want come. Don't, I mean, this is my advice and everyone's going to do what they need to do, but I don't even sit down and write something and think, oh, this is a horror poem, a science fiction, a fantasy. I don't do that. Whatever the image's story unwinds from me is what I put down. And then I shape after that. So I think the first step is always to allow yourself to go to your deepest part of your joy and pain and write from there. And then when you go to reshape it because you want the rest of the world to read it, that's where you may change a lot of things. But if you're coming from that authentic self, then what you write is going to stand out because it's unique to you and not like anyone else. So I think that's the first place that's very important. And after that, editing is very important because when you go to send your work in, you want it. I mean, I'm not the only one to say this, but submission guidelines, pay attention. Standard, you know, format, pay attention. And, you know, don't think just because you think your work is the best in the world, you can print it in pink font. I mean, you've got to do these things. It's like going to a job interview where you're going in torn jeans or if you're going in a suit. If everyone's going to that interview in a suit, you best wear a suit. So I think, you know, while creating whatever comes from your inner self, editing to make it as clean, clear as you can, and then go back and keep doing that. And I don't even think too much. I tell people, don't think too much about being rejected because you know what, you can always be rejected. But you got to just send it out and then go back and write some more stuff. And I always say, send it to the top market. It took me over 10 years to get an Isaac Asimov science fiction magazine. So you know, don't let rejection, it won't take you down too hard. So especially if you keep writing, you know, as long as you go back and keep creating new stuff, then you can get through the rejection part and then the acceptance will come.
Great. Now I have some questions about you as a person. What's the one thing that most people don't know about you?
Oh, I was thinking about this. That I used to take belly dancing lessons. And I had one public performance at Nikon. And someone took pictures and I looked great in those pictures. But after that performance, I was like, I'm a writer, not a belly dancer. Not that I didn't do well. I was just like, that's a lot of pressure. But I love belly dancing in general. So I don't think people know that I took lessons for a long time on that. Enjoyed it very much.
Wow, one of the other authors did that too. That's great.
I'll have to ask that question.
So, what question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
You know, I've thought about this. I don't know, because I don't think a lot about my process until I have to answer that. So I just don't know. I mean, I've been asked questions I can't always answer. I was asked, what is my legacy in an interview? And I was like, I don't know. And my answer kind of said that. I think that's a question answered by readers and people who know me. So I don't know. I don't really, I can't think of anything that I would want someone to ask me that that I'm like burning. Maybe what's my favorite food, chocolate, wine, but that comes up in conversation at conventions. So
That's a good one. Okay. So speaking of chocolate and wine and food, um, what does your writing space look like, and what is it that you might want to have with you while you're writing? What kinds of foods or drinks might you want to have with you?
yeah, I as anyone who knows me, I love a nice glass of Chardonnay at the end of the day, but I do not drink wine when I'm writing. I need to have that all clear and open. Some people can write while they drink, and that's them. What I do like is a scent. I don't know why, but I like to have a scent. So I have scented wax and incense that and I drink a lot of water when I'm writing. But it's something about the scents that allow me to sort of center myself and stay open to whatever's coming. And then music sometime, but music without words, because I love words. So if I hear something, if I'm listening to something with words, it's going to overwhelm what I'm trying to let the words come. So, that's the basic environment for me. And I love being surrounded by books in my office where I'm at now. It's just so comforting to me.
So what does your space look like? What does your writing space look like?
Lots of bookcases, lots of books of people. It's a funny thing. I have this is like a little transformer car. It transforms into a robot, and it's from, my son is way older now, but this is one of his toys. And sometimes when I'm writing and I'm in between a scene, I'll just like unconsciously play with it. So, there's just a lot of that around. Sometimes I do like to have other people's books. Weston Oaks is one of them. There's other people who, if I'm kind of working through something and I'm sort of in a quiet time where nothing's coming, I'll just open his or other people's book who write really well, like characters, action, move, 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 and just flip to any place in there and just, read, not to copy or anything, but just like a cleanser, like a palate cleanser of my mind, and then put it down and go back to my own writing. So.
And do you normally write on a computer, or do you write on a notebook?
Well, when I'm doing finished stuff, it's on the computer. But I do have, as I said, hundreds of these. And this is where I put little seeds of things. Characters that occur to me, lines that occur to me. This is where all my poetry comes from often, because in all the collections I've done, when I do feel like I'm ready to do a new collection, I'll go back to the journals the day after the last one. And there's always little bits and pieces that I've written in here that I will go in and pull out and then build poetry on. It's like, I call them seeds, like little seeds to go in and pull out. So that kind of writing often usually is on paper. But when I go to create something that I know is going to be published, I do it on the computer, because I keep versions. I use the thesaurus like an addict, because when I do first drafts, I usually use the same words we all do. And then I use the thesaurus because I like to have new, interesting
Mhm.
words when I, go to edit things. So.
Okay. And a lot of writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help or hinder them. And do you have any of those? And do they help or hinder you?
Other than my transformer car, no. This is usually all I need to keep my hands busy. I mean, in between, I have dry eyes, so I can't be on the computer more than an hour if I'm writing.
Mm.
I gotta take a break because I start to get double vision. So I do Tai Chi. I do moving meditation, which is again Tai Chi, and I have a wonderful courtyard. I go out and trim the bushes and sweep up leaves, just things that are not about writing, to give myself that break in between when I'm actually writing. So don't have any pets.
Okay. What is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for them?
Well, the one that I don't have enough time for is reading. That just makes me sad. It does. Right now, especially having lost 6 months last year, I'm catching up on a lot of projects with other people. But normally when it's not like that, I like to sit down, and usually on the weekend, especially Sunday, and just read all day. Take breaks in between and read. The Tai Chi and the garden are really my biggest relaxation. And I do some exercising too in between, because I think as writers we sit a lot.
Yeah, I would think you would have to. It's kind of hard to write standing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have these sort of animal human bodies, so it's good to get up and move it a little bit every now and then. So
True, true. Um, and I just have two more questions for you.
mhm.
One is where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I'm going to put a little plug in for Annie's. If you call us at 508-796-5613, we can order any of the books that have Linda's stories in them or poems. And you can also send email at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com, and we could do that also. But where else could you get your books?
Yes, I'm a big supporter of independent bookstores. So yes, go there. Order Black Panther, Weird Tales, Place of Broken Things, How to Recognize a Demon Has Become Your Friend. Do that, do that. Otherwise, you can find me in all the online bookstores, all those different places. Just look for Linda Addison. You can go look at my site. My site will link to online bookstores too. And my site is Linda Addison Poet, all together, one word. So.
Okay, great. And the last question I have for you is how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Well, as some people might know, I'm not very shy in sharing it myself. So I am on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Linda Addison, or Nightbird, NYTE Bird 45. So you can always follow me there. I'm always, whenever something new comes out, I'm going to shout out today about the New York Live Arts exhibit, because besides my poem, and then the graphic for the poem, they also have me reading the poem. There's a recording on there. And there's
Wonderful.
a lot of incredible art at this exhibit. So, but yeah, I would
Great.
say check me out in those places, because I am always going to let people know when they come see some new stuff.
And let people know about this video too. That would be wonderful.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Linda. This has been great. And hopefully, when COVID is over, hopefully soon, but you'll sometimes maybe visit our store. It would be wonderful.
Absolutely. And then let everybody know so they can come. Yeah.
You're right. Well, thank you very much. And we hope to see you sometime soon.
Thank you. Thank you for spending this time with me.
Bye-bye.